Late evening always smells like dust and old paper in that shop, and for some reason, that's when the sentence first lodged itself in my head. I've been waiting for this moment. She hadn't said it yet, not out loud, but the way she paused in the doorway that night, hands still on the glass, made it feel inevitable, like something already spoken that just hadn't reached sound. I worked at the bookstore because it stayed quiet after 6. Quiet enough to hear yourself think, which is dangerous, but better than noise. The place sat between a closed tailor and a cafe that only opened on weekends, the kind of street people forgot unless they were looking for something specific or avoiding something else. She came in just before closing. I remember because I was counting the till, already halfway into leaving, my jacket slung over the chair. The bell above the door rang, sharp, apologetic, and I looked up ready to say we were closing in 5. She stood there instead. Mid-40s, maybe older, not trying to look younger. That was the first thing. Her hair was pulled back loosely, not careless, just unguarded. She wore a coat that looked expensive but worn in, like it had lived a life before that night. When our eyes met, she smiled, not big, not polite. A small one, like she was acknowledging a private thought. "Sorry," she said, glancing at the clock behind me. "Am I too late?" Her voice didn't rush. It didn't apologize the way people usually do when they're interrupting someone's end-of-day escape. I shook my head too quickly. No, you're fine." She walked in, slow, taking in the shelves as if she'd been there before. Maybe she had. I wouldn't have noticed. I'd only been working there 3 months, and before her, all customers blurred together into transactions and receipts. "I'm looking for something," she said. "Aren't we all?" I meant it as a joke, but it came out flatter than I intended. She laughed anyway. Not loud, just enough to change the air. She told me the author's name, and I led her toward the back, past the fiction section that always leaned slightly to the left because one shelf leg was shorter than the others. She walked close enough that I could feel her presence without touching her, like heat through a wall. As I scanned the spines, I felt her watching, not staring, just attentive. It made my shoulders tense, made me suddenly aware of my hands, my posture, the faint smell of oil and paper on my clothes. When I finally found the book, I pulled it out and turned. We were closer than I expected. There was a pause. Not dramatic, just long enough to notice. "Thank you," she said, taking the book, our fingers brushing briefly. It was nothing. Static. Accidental. But she didn't pull away right away. Neither did I. Then she did, and the moment snapped back into place like it had never existed. At the counter, her card wouldn't swipe. She sighed, embarrassed, rummaging through her bag. "It always works," she said, more to herself than to me. "It's fine," I said. "No rush." She looked up then, really looked, like she was measuring something. "You're kind," she said. "Most people pretend patience. You don't." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Silence stretched again, comfortable and uncomfortable at once. When the payment finally went through, she lingered, hand on the counter. "You close late," she said. "Later than I should." She smiled at that. The bell rang as she left, and the shop felt bigger, emptier. I locked the door a minute later, turned off the lights, and stood there longer than necessary, staring at the reflection in the glass. All the way home, through the dim streetlights and the quiet bus ride, I kept thinking about the way she'd paused before leaving, like she almost said something else, like she was waiting for a moment, and somehow, so was I. She came back 3 nights later. I didn't expect her to, which is probably why I noticed everything this time. The way the bell rang softer when she opened the door, like she already knew how to handle it, the way she paused just inside the shop as if deciding whether she should be there at all. I was at the counter, cataloging a box of used paperbacks, my sleeves rolled up. When I looked up, she was already watching me. She didn't smile right away. "Hi," she said, like we'd agreed to meet. "Hi," I answered, then immediately felt stupid for how much meaning I packed into the word. She held up the book she'd bought last time. "I think there's a misprint," she said. 2 pages are missing." I took it from her, flipped through. She was right. A chunk of the story just gone. I apologized, too much, and offered to replace it. She shook her head. "No, it's fine. I kind of like the gap." She hesitated, then added, "It made me imagine what should have been there." We stood side by side at the counter while I searched the inventory system. The overhead light flickered, something it always did when it rained. Outside, the street was slick and dim, reflections stretching longer than they should have. She leaned against the counter, arms folded loosely, like she was holding herself together without realizing it. Up close, I noticed the faint lines at the corners of her eyes, the tiredness she hadn't bothered to hide. Her hands rested on the wood, fingers tapping once, then still. "You work a lot?" I asked, mostly to fill the quiet. She let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh. Too much. There was more in the way she said it. Not complaint. Resignation. I told her I could order another copy. She nodded, but didn't look relieved. Instead, she washed my hands as I typed, her gaze following the movement like it mattered. "Do you ever feel?" she started, then stopped. Her mouth closed, opened again. "Never mind." I waited. I didn't push. That felt important. She exhaled slowly, eyes on the book between us. "Do you ever feel like you arrive late to your own life?" she asked. The question landed heavier than it should have. I didn't know her well enough for it, and yet it felt like she'd chosen me on purpose. "Sometimes," I said. It was the safest honest answer I had. She nodded once, like that confirmed something. Her laugh came then, soft, surprised, almost embarrassed. She lifted a hand to her mouth, then let it drop again when she realized no one was watching. "I shouldn't be saying things like that to a stranger," she said. "You're not a stranger," I said before I could stop myself. She looked at me then. Really looked. The guard came back up quickly, like muscle memory. She straightened, picked up her bag. "You're kind," she said again, but this time it sounded like a boundary. That can be dangerous. When she left, the rain had started in earnest. Through the window, I watched her hesitate on the sidewalk, fumbling with her umbrella, clearly exhausted. On impulse, I grabbed one from the stand by the door and stepped outside. "You forgot this," I said, holding it out. Her fingers closed around the handle, brushing mine. She didn't pull away. For a second, neither of us moved. "Thank you," she whispered. I stood there long after she walked into the rain, the echo of her hand still warm in mine, wondering why something that small felt like crossing a line I hadn't known was there. It was raining, the kind of rain that doesn't let up, not dramatic, just steady enough to wear you down. The shop stayed open later that night because the power had flickered twice, and closing procedures stalled into waiting. She was already inside when it happened, sitting at the small table near the back, coat still on, book open but untouched. "You don't have to stay," I said, meaning it. She looked up, then at the windows, the water streaking down like the street was dissolving. "I know," she said. "I don't mind. I made us coffee in paper cups that never kept heat long enough." When I handed hers over, she took it with both hands, like she needed the warmth more than the drink. "Long day?" I asked. She nodded. "Long life," she said, then winced slightly, as if she'd revealed too much again. We sat in that half-light where the overhead bulbs hummed softly, and the shelves cast uneven shadows. She slipped her coat off, draped it over the chair. Her sweater clung to her arms, and I noticed the way she rolled her shoulders once, subtly, like something ached there. "You can sit," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "You don't have to hover." I sat. The rain filled the pauses for us. She told me about her job, details without specifics, enough to explain the tiredness, but not the story behind it. I told her less, and she didn't ask for more. That imbalance felt deliberate, like she was choosing what to reveal and what to protect. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, then flipped it face down immediately. Her fingers lingered there, pressing lightly, as if holding something back. "Sorry," she said. "It's okay. It's just..." She stopped, rubbed her thumb along the rim of her cup. "Someone who doesn't know when to stop calling." I didn't ask who. I didn't want the answer. The power cut out completely then. Not darkness. Emergency lights flicked on, casting everything in a dull amber. The shop felt smaller, closer. She laughed softly. "Of course." I stood to check the breaker, and when I came back, she was closer to the counter than before. I hadn't noticed her move. We were standing within that fragile distance where anything would be obvious. "You're not afraid of the dark," she said, not quite a question. "Only of saying the wrong thing." She smiled at that, then let it fade. "You wouldn't," she said. "You think too much." She reached out without looking, her hand resting briefly on my wrist, steadying herself, or me. The contact was light, but it anchored something. I could feel my pulse there, betraying me. She noticed. Her breath caught, just a fraction. There was a moment then, quiet, suspended, where it felt like she might say it. Whatever it was. Her mouth opened slightly, her eyes searching my face for permission or warning. Her phone buzzed again, louder this time. She pulled her hand back as if burned, picked up the phone, glanced at the screen. Her expression closed. "Careful. I should go," she said, already reaching for her coat. I wanted to tell her to stay. I wanted to tell her I'd been thinking about her since the night she walked into my life like it wasn't an accident. Instead, I nodded. At the door, she paused, hand on the frame, rain audible beyond the glass. "There are things," she said slowly, "that don't belong where we want them to." I stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat she carried with her. "I know," I said. She looked at my mouth. Just once. Then she left, and I stood there, my hand still lifted, a breath away from touching her shoulder, wondering what would have happened if the phone had stayed silent. She didn't come back for a week. I told myself that was normal. People have lives. Weather clears. Books get finished. But the shop felt wrong without the quiet weight she brought with her, like a chair pulled out and never pushed back in. When she finally did return, it wasn't late evening. It was earlier, the lights still undecided outside, hovering between afternoon and evening. She stood just inside the door, not moving, like she needed permission. "Hi," she said. "Hi," I answered, softer this time. She walked in slowly, stopped at the counter. She didn't browse. She didn't pretend. Her bag stayed on her shoulder. "I didn't mean to disappear," she said. "I just needed to hear myself think." I nodded. Did it help? She considered that, then shook her head once. No, the honesty landed heavier than anything she'd said before. We didn't sit. Standing kept things honest, or maybe dangerous. The shop was quiet. No rain, no flickering lights, just the low hum of the refrigerator in the back and the distant sound of traffic leaking through the windows. She folded her hands together, then unfolded them. "Again, this has stopped feeling harmless," she said finally. I didn't interrupt. I didn't move. "I come in here telling myself it's about books," she continued, eyes fixed on the counter between us. "Or conversation. Or the quiet. But that's not true anymore." My throat tightened. I leaned back against the shelf behind me, more for balance than distance. "What is it then?" I asked, though part of me already knew. She looked up. The look held everything she hadn't said before. Hesitation, awareness, something like regret forming before the act itself. "It feels like standing on a line," she said, "and knowing if I step over it, I don't get to step back." I swallowed. "You don't have to. I know." Her voice softened. "That's what scares me." Silence stretched. Not empty. Loaded. I could hear my own breathing, the faint creak of the building settling. "You're younger," she said quietly. "You're supposed to be somewhere else. Wanting someone else. I don't want to be the reason you hesitate." I wanted to tell her she already was. That hesitation had been living in me since the first night she paused in the doorway. Instead, I said, "I don't feel pulled. I feel awake." That made her flinch. She stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint scar near her collarbone, the way her chest rose and fell unevenly. "This isn't about romance," she said, almost pleading. "It's about timing. And consequences. And knowing better." I nodded. My hands curled into fists at my sides. She reached out, then stopped herself, her fingers hovering between us like they didn't know where to land. "This is where people ruin things," she whispered. "Not by doing something, but by pretending nothing is happening." I met her gaze and didn't look away. "So what are we doing?" I asked. Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with something heavier. She dropped her hand, took a step back. "I don't know," she said. "But I know I can't keep coming here just to practice not touching you." She turned and walked out before I could answer. The bell rang. The door closed. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel safe. It felt like something breaking. I found out by accident. She left her scarf behind. It was folded neatly over the back of the chair near the counter, the one she never sat in for long. I didn't notice it until I was locking up, the shop already dim, the day settling into that familiar quiet. The fabric was soft, worn thin at the edges, carrying a faint trace of something floral and clean. I held it longer than necessary, then told myself I'd keep it safe for when she came back. She came back the next evening, earlier than usual, different somehow. Her hair was loose this time, falling around her shoulders like she'd stopped caring about keeping things contained. She looked at the scarf in my hand and smiled, small, tired, grateful. "Thank you," she said. "I thought I'd lost it." "You don't lose things," I said before thinking. "You leave them." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "That's fair." She didn't head for the shelves. She stayed by the counter, resting her palms on the wood. Her shoulders sagged slightly, like she'd set something down she'd been carrying all day. "I should tell you something," she said. I waited. "There was someone," she continued, "a long time ago. Not recent enough to still hurt the way people expect, but not far enough to be done with." She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, hesitated, then showed me a photo. It wasn't romantic. No arms around waists, no smiles aimed at the camera. Just two people sitting on steps, caught mid-laugh. The man beside her was younger than I expected. Tired eyes. Familiar posture. "He died," she said simply. The word didn't echo. It just sat there between us. "I don't come back because of him," she added quickly, like she was afraid I'd make that assumption. "But you remind me of who I was when I knew him. Before everything narrowed." I didn't know what to do with that. My first instinct was to apologize, which made no sense. My second was to step back, which felt worse. "I'm not him," I said quietly. "I know," she said. "That's what makes it harder." Her laugh came then, short, strained. She rubbed at her eyes with the heel of her hand, embarrassed. "I promised myself I wouldn't do this again," she said. "That I wouldn't let someone feel like a second version of a loss." I thought of the nights she'd stood in the doorway. The pauses. The way she watched me like I was already leaving. "I don't feel like a replacement," I said. "I feel like an interruption." She looked up sharply. "Yes," she said. "Exactly that." The shop felt smaller again. I could hear the hum of the lights, the muffled sounds of the street outside. "I don't want to take something from you," I said. "But I don't want to pretend this doesn't matter." She stepped closer, close enough that the air between us changed. She reached out, then stopped herself again, fingers curling back into her palm. "I've been waiting for this moment," she said softly. "For someone to see me without trying to fix me." The words landed slow, deep. She took the scarf from my hand, her fingers brushing mine, lingering just a second longer than necessary. "I don't know what this means," she whispered. Neither did I. But as she turned to leave, I realized something had already shifted, not forward or back, but sideways, into a place where nothing could stay the same again. It didn't happen the way I'd imagined. There was no dramatic return, no rush of words. She came in on an ordinary night, one where nothing in the world seemed to pause for us. The bell rang. I looked up. She was there. That was it. "I don't have much time," she said, before I could say anything else. Okay. That was the shape of it now. Careful, honest, stripped of pretending. The shop was quiet, but not tense. Almost resigned. I poured tea this time instead of coffee, the kettle clicking off too soon. She took the cup from me and didn't joke about the heat. She just held it, staring into the steam like it might say something first. "I keep thinking I'll walk in here and feel nothing," she said. "Like this will finally fade into something manageable." And she shook her head. "It hasn't." I leaned against the counter, not crossing the space between us. I didn't want to corner the moment. "I don't want to be careful with you anymore," she continued. "But I don't want to be reckless either. I don't want to wake up one day and realize I used you as proof that I'm still capable of feeling." The words didn't wound. They clarified. "I don't feel used," I said. "I feel chosen, even when you're trying not to." She closed her eyes at that. Just for a second, like she needed to steady herself. "You don't know how unfair that is," she said quietly. "I know," I said. "But it's still true." We stood there for a long time. The clock behind the counter ticked too loud. A bus passed outside, rattling the window. She set the cup down and finally crossed the space between us, not all the way. Just enough that I could feel her presence again, the warmth, the gravity of her. I can't promise you anything neat, she said. I can't promise timing or certainty or ease. I'm not asking for need, I said. I'm asking for real. That made her smile. Not sad, not guarded, just real. She lifted her hand slowly, like she was giving me time to change my mind. I didn't. Her fingers touched mine, light, deliberate. The contact was almost nothing. It was everything. She leaned her forehead against my shoulder, not hiding, not claiming, just resting there. I didn't move. I breathed when she breathed. We don't have to decide everything tonight, she murmured. No, I said. We just have to stop pretending this isn't here. She stayed like that for a while. Then she pulled back, picked up her bag. I'll see you, she said. Not a question, not a promise. Something steadier. Yeah, I said. You will. After she left, I didn't chase the feeling or analyze it into something fragile. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and stood in the quiet. Nothing had exploded. Nothing had been saved. But something had settled, soft, irreversible. And for the first time, that felt like enough. I'm telling this from a quieter place. Not because everything turned out perfectly. It didn't. But because the noise settled enough for me to understand what actually happened between us and what didn't. We didn't rush into anything after that night. No sudden rewriting of our lives. No dramatic gestures. She still came into the shop, sometimes late, sometimes not at all. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we stood side by side in silence, both of us pretending to look at different shelves while being acutely aware of the same space between our hands. What changed wasn't the situation. It was the way we occupied it. She stopped apologizing for the pauses. I stopped mistaking restraint for rejection. There were nights she looked tired in a deeper way, the kind that had nothing to do with work, and I learned not to fill that space with questions. There were moments I wanted more, time, clarity, certainty, and learned that wanting didn't mean demanding. Love, I realized, doesn't always announce itself by arriving loudly. Sometimes it shows up by staying when it would be easier to leave. One evening, weeks later, we closed the shop together. No customers, no interruptions, just the sound of the lock turning and the streetlights humming awake outside. We stood there for a moment, unsure which way to go. She adjusted her coat, then paused. Looked at me. You know, she said, I spent years thinking love was about being chosen at the right time. I waited. Turns out, she added, it's about recognizing when something is real, even if the timing is wrong. I didn't answer right away. I was thinking about the version of myself from before I met her. The one who thought intensity meant certainty, who believed love had to be loud to be true. I think, I said finally, it's also about becoming someone who can stay gentle when things don't resolve. She smiled at that, not the careful smile, the one she didn't guard. We walked a block together before parting. At the corner, she reached out and squeezed my hand once. No hesitation, no drama. That was it. We didn't need more. What I learned is this. Love doesn't always take what it wants. Sometimes it changes you instead. It teaches you how to listen, how to wait, how to recognize connection without trying to own it. She didn't save me. I didn't fix her. But we saw each other, clearly, briefly, honestly. And that left a mark neither of us is trying to erase. Late evenings still smell like dust and old paper. The shop still gets quiet after 6. And sometimes, when the bell rings and I look up, I remember the way she once paused in the doorway like a moment deciding whether to exist. Some moments don't pass. They just settle into you. And if this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?